The desert stretched endlessly under the cruel sun, a land of dust and silence where only the wind seemed alive. A lone cowboy named Eli Tanner rode across that wasteland, his shirt torn, his hat heavy with dust and his skin burnt by 3 days of relentless heat. His horse moved with slow, uneven steps, each one weaker than the last. 2 days ago, Eli had been ambushed near the San Pedro River. Cattle thieves, 4 of them, had tried to steal the herd he was driving north for a rancher in Tucson. He fought back with his revolver, dropped 2 of them before the others fled. But not before one bullet grazed his ribs, tearing into his side. At first he thought it was nothing, just a flesh wound. He tied a rag around it and kept riding. But by the 2nd day the pain grew worse. By the 3rd the wound burned like fire, and fever fogged his thoughts. The last of his water was gone that morning. His lips were cracked, his tongue heavy. The horizon shimmered like silver water, teasing him with false lakes. Every step of his horse sent knives of pain through his body, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. The cowboy's code was simple. You didn't quit no matter how bad it hurt. By noon, the world was spinning. Eli's vision blurred as he tried to keep his eyes open. He mumbled to himself to stay awake, but the desert didn't care. The sun climbed higher. The rocks glowed like coals, and the sky turned white with heat. Finally, the horse stumbled, gasped once, and fell onto its knees. Eli slid off the saddle and landed on his knees in the sand. He put his hand on the horse's neck and felt it trembling. "You did good, old boy," he whispered, his voice cracked and dry. "You carried me farther than I had a right to ask." He removed the saddle, laid it beside the horse, and stayed there for a moment, watching the animal's sides rise and fall until it went still. The silence that followed was thick and lonely. Eli stood swaying a little and started walking. He didn't know where, just forward. The canyons ahead looked like walls of fire. He thought maybe there'd be a spring or a creek somewhere beyond them. Maybe. He'd seen Apache trails before in these lands. Maybe he'd meet someone, or maybe he'd just fall and never get up again. His boots dragged through the dust. His mouth was too dry to speak. Every breath scraped his throat. His thoughts drifted far from the desert, to his father's ranch back in Kansas, to the wide green fields after rain, to his little sister chasing chickens around the yard. He remembered her laughter, high and free. It seemed a lifetime ago. The ground tilted under his feet, and he fell hard to his knees. For a long time he stayed there, staring at the shimmering air. His hand shook. Then faintly he heard something strange, soft, like humming. A woman's voice. The words were not English. The sound came and went, carried by the wind. Eli blinked, lifted his head. There was movement near the rocks, a figure walking slowly toward him. He rubbed his eyes, thinking it was a trick of the heat. But no, she was real. A woman. She was dressed in brown doeskin that moved gently in the breeze. Her hair, long and black, was braided with small feathers. Around her neck hung turquoise stones that caught the sunlight. She carried a clay pot in her hands, and her steps were quiet, careful, as though she'd done this walk 1,000 times. Eli tried to stand, but his legs gave out. The world spun again. He fell back into the sand, and his heartbeat pounded in his ears. The woman knelt beside him. Her face was calm, her eyes dark and steady like still water. "Don't move," she said softly. Her English touched with a different rhythm. "You are hurt. You have fever." Her hand rested lightly on his forehead. It was cool, softer than anything he'd felt in days. He tried to speak, to ask who she was, but his lips made no sound. His throat felt like ash. The woman opened the clay pot, dipped her fingers inside, and touched water to his lips. He tasted it, cold, sweet, real. He tried to drink, but she stopped him with a gentle hand. "Slow," she whispered. "If you want more water, just close your eyes. You will have it soon." Her voice was soft and sure, and something in it told him to trust her, so he closed his eyes. When he opened them again, time had slipped away. He wasn't lying on the desert floor anymore. He was under shade, inside a small shelter built from branches and animal hides. The air smelled of herbs and smoke. His wound was wrapped in clean strips of cloth that smelled like mint and wild roots. He tried to sit up but groaned from the pain. The woman appeared beside him carrying a small bowl. "Rest," she said firmly. "You're safe now." He studied her face again in the dim light. There were small paint markings on her cheeks, red and white, and a long scar across her arm that looked old, healed long ago. She looked young, but her eyes held the patience of someone who had seen many storms. "Where am I?" he managed to whisper. "In my camp," she said simply. "You were almost gone when I found you. The desert takes many men. You are lucky I was walking that trail today." He swallowed weakly. "You saved me." She didn't answer that. Instead, she dipped a spoon into the bowl and lifted it to his lips. "Drink. This will cool the fire inside you." He hesitated, then obeyed. The liquid was thick and bitter, made from herbs he couldn't name. It burned his throat for a second, then spread warmth through his chest. The fever in his body seemed to ease. "You are stubborn," she said with a faint smile. "Most men do not listen when I tell them to rest. But you—" She looked at him, her eyes shining with quiet humor. "You listen. That is good." He almost smiled back, but was too weak. "Who are you?" "My name is Nayeli," she said. "I am Apache. My people live in these canyons. I heal those who are wounded or sick. Sometimes white men come here lost or hurt. Some are kind, some are not. But I help them all. Life is life." Eli looked at her hands, strong, skilled hands used to work and care. She wasn't afraid of him, though many in her tribe might hate cowboys for what had been done to their people. "Why, help me?" he asked softly. She looked toward the opening of the shelter where the rain began to fall in light drops. "Because the desert does not care what color your skin is," she said. "It burns all men the same. And because once someone helped me when I was dying, I owe that kindness to others." The wind outside shifted, carrying the scent of wet earth. The soft patter of rain against the hides filled the small shelter with a peaceful rhythm. Nayeli stirred the herbs in the bowl again and began to hum that same tune he'd heard before, low and calm, like a lullaby for the desert. Eli listened, eyes half closed. The fever haze began to fade, replaced by a quiet calm he hadn't felt in years. His body hurt, but the fear that had clung to him since the ambush was gone. As thunder rolled faintly in the distance, Nayeli whispered a few words in her language. A prayer, maybe. Eli didn't understand it, but he felt its meaning all the same. Rain began to pour harder, dripping through the cracks in the roof. Nayeli moved closer to cover the weak spots with hides, then looked back at him. "Sleep," she said softly. "Let the rain wash away your pain." He wanted to ask one more question about her, about this strange mercy in a world so cruel, but his strength was gone. His eyelids grew heavy. As he drifted into sleep, he heard her voice one last time, steady and kind. "You are safe, cowboy. The desert took your strength, but it will give you peace." Outside, the rain fell harder, turning the dust into life. Inside the small Apache shelter, a wounded cowboy dreamed of rivers, green fields, and a healer's voice that sounded like hope. And for the first time since the gunfire on that dusty trail, Eli Tanner didn't fear tomorrow. He simply breathed, alive and thankful as the storm sang him to sleep. When Eli Tanner opened his eyes the next morning, the desert sun had softened into gold light filtering through the cracks in the shelter. The air smelled of sage, smoke, and earth after rain. His body ached, but the burning pain from his wound had lessened. For the first time in days, he could take a deep breath without feeling like knives were in his ribs. He turned his head and saw Nayeli, the Apache healer, kneeling near the fire pit. She was grinding herbs with a smooth stone, her movement steady and sure. Her hair caught the sunlight, glimmering with faint traces of water from the morning dew. She noticed him stirring and glanced back. "You wake early," she said softly. "Good, that means the fever is weaker." Her calm voice made him feel at ease. She poured hot water into a clay cup and added some herbs, stirring them with a wooden stick. Then she brought it to him. "Drink this," she said. "It will give you strength." Eli pushed himself up slowly, wincing as his muscles protested. She reached out and steadied his shoulder. Her touch was firm but gentle. He took the cup and drank. The taste was strange, bitter at first, then warm and soothing. He looked around the small shelter. There were clay jars, bundles of dried plants hanging from the beams, and a few animal skins rolled neatly in a corner. It was simple but clean, built with care. "Where are we exactly?" he asked after a moment. "Far from your world," she said with a faint smile, "in the canyons near the river's bones. Only my people and the wind know this place." He nodded, unsure how to answer that. He still couldn't believe she had found him out there. "You saved my life," he said finally. "I don't know how to thank you." Nayeli looked into the fire, stirring the ashes with a stick. "You already thanked me by living," she said. Many men I find do not open their eyes again. The words made Eli quiet. He watched her for a long moment. There was something about the way she moved, graceful but strong, quiet but sure. He wanted to ask how she came to live out here alone, but he sensed that some questions were best left for later. When he finished drinking, she handed him a small piece of flatbread and some dried berries. "Eat slow," she advised. "Your stomach is not ready for big food." He ate, and as he did, the warmth of the bread reminded him how long it had been since anyone cared whether he ate or not. On the trail, he was always alone. No one to ask if he was hungry. No one to watch over him when fever came. But here in this quiet place, a stranger tended to him as though he mattered. After breakfast, Nayeli stepped outside and he heard her humming again. Her voice carried softly through the air, mixing with the sound of a stream somewhere nearby. When she returned, she carried a wooden bowl filled with cool water. She dipped a cloth in it and began cleaning the wound on his side. Eli tensed from the sting, but she gave him a steady look. "You must be brave again, Cowboy," she said. "Pain is the road back to strength." He chuckled weakly. "You speak like a soldier." Her lips curved slightly. "My people have fought many battles. We learn to be strong not with hate but with heart." Her words made him thoughtful. He looked into her eyes and saw something deeper, something beyond the calm surface she showed. There was loss there and memory. He wanted to ask about it, but she was focused on her work. When she finished cleaning the wound, she applied a paste of crushed green leaves and wrapped it with clean cloth. "There," she said. "You will heal fast. Maybe in a few days you walk again." He smiled faintly. "And after that?" "After that," she said, "you ride home." He didn't answer. Home felt like a faraway dream now. Later that day, the sun rose higher, painting the canyon walls with red and gold. Nayeli left to gather herbs and roots, telling him to rest. Eli lay back, listening to the sound of wind outside. He closed his eyes but didn't sleep. His thoughts wandered to his horse lying lifeless in the desert. He felt a dull ache in his chest. That horse had carried him for years, through storms, dust, and loneliness. Losing it felt like losing an old friend. Hours passed. When Nayeli returned, she was carrying a bundle of plants and a rabbit she had caught with a snare. She cleaned it carefully outside, her movements quick and practiced. She didn't speak much, but everything she did had quiet purpose. Eli watched from inside, feeling both grateful and curious. That evening, she roasted the rabbit with herbs, and the smell filled the shelter. She handed him a small portion. "Eat more now," she said. "You are stronger today." He took the food, smiling faintly. "You sure know how to take care of a man." Her eyes lifted to his, calm and unreadable. "I take care of those who listen," she said simply. "The desert does not forgive foolish men." He laughed softly. "Then I guess I owe you my life twice over." She gave a slight nod, but her expression stayed thoughtful. "No life belongs to another," she said. "We only borrow time from the earth. When someone helps you, you pass that kindness forward. That is the only way balance stays." Eli grew quiet again. Her words carried weight, simple but full of meaning. He realized this woman didn't just heal wounds. She carried a kind of wisdom that went deeper than medicine. After they finished eating, the sun slipped behind the cliffs and the desert began to cool. The fire crackled softly, throwing warm light on the shelter walls. Crickets sang outside and the night air smelled of rain and sage. Eli sat up slowly, resting against the wooden frame. "Nayeli," he said after a while, "how long have you been alone here?" She hesitated before answering. "Since my father died," she said quietly. "He was a healer too. He taught me how to use the earth's gifts. When sickness came to our people, we treated them. But one day soldiers came to our village. They thought we were hiding men who attacked their wagons. It was not true. Still, they burned everything." Her voice didn't break, but the silence between words was heavy. Eli's heart sank. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Nayeli looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "You did not do it," she said. "But you understand loss. I can see it in your eyes." He nodded. "Yes," he said. "I've lost more than I care to remember." For a moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled, and a coyote's distant howl echoed through the canyon. Nayeli began to hum again, soft, slow, like a song for the dead. It made the air feel sacred somehow. When she finished, she looked at him and said, "You should sleep. Tomorrow we walk to the river. You need clean water for your wound." He smiled faintly. "You're the boss around here. Her lips curved again just slightly. "Someone has to keep cowboys alive," she said. He lay back down, feeling oddly at peace. As he closed his eyes, he listened to the steady rhythm of her breathing near the fire. In the days that followed, Eli's strength grew. Each morning, Nayeli made him walk a little farther, leaning on a stick she carved for him. She taught him the names of plants, the ones that healed fever, the ones that stopped pain. He listened, though half the time he was more focused on her calm voice than the lessons. She spoke of her people, of the old ways, how they read the sky, how they followed the river's whispers to find water. Eli told her about ranch life, about long rides under starlight and the songs cowboys sang to keep the herd calm. They were two worlds apart, yet their stories fit together easily, like pieces of a quiet puzzle. One evening, as they sat by the fire watching the stars, Nayeli said, "The desert tests every soul that crosses it. It took your horse, your strength, and almost your life. But maybe it gave you something too." Eli looked at her, puzzled. What could it possibly give me? She smiled faintly, her eyes warm and steady. "A second chance," she said. He thought about that long after she fell asleep. He looked up at the sky, where 1,000 stars burned bright above the canyon. For the first time in years, he felt something inside him begin to heal. Not just his wound, but something deeper. The desert had nearly killed him. But under the care of an Apache healer, it was also bringing him back to life. The morning light poured into the canyon like soft gold, spreading warmth across the rocks in the small shelter where Eli Tanner sat sharpening a stick with a piece of flint. His side had healed enough for him to move without pain, though the scar still itched. Every breath he took felt stronger now. The fever was gone, and the color had returned to his face. Outside, Nayeli was hanging strips of dried meat under the shade of a tree. Her long braids moved gently with the wind. She looked peaceful, as if she belonged to this land like one of its quiet secrets. Eli watched her for a moment before stepping outside. "You're up early again," he said, smiling a little. Nayeli turned to him, squinting against the light. "The sun does not wait for anyone," she replied. "The desert rewards those who wake with it." Eli chuckled softly. "Guess I'm still learning that." She handed him a small gourd filled with water. "You walk better today," she noted. "Tomorrow maybe you climb." "Climb?" he repeated. "You trying to make a cowboy into a mountain goat?" Nayeli tilted her head slightly, amused. "Maybe," she said. "The cliffs above hold a spring that feeds this land. It is sacred to my people. I must gather water from there once every season. The spring water keeps our medicine strong." Eli looked up at the towering rocks that surrounded the canyon. "And you're planning to go up there alone?" "I have always gone alone," she said simply. Eli's brow furrowed. "Then this time you won't. I owe you my life." "The least I can do is help carry that water." Nayeli studied him quietly. Her eyes held that same calm strength he had come to respect. "If you come," she said, "you must listen. The canyon has rules. The spirits here do not like noise or pride." He smiled faintly. "I'll keep quiet. That's one thing I can do." The next morning they began their climb. The air was cool and the sky glowed pale blue. Eli carried 2 clay jugs and a leather sling, while Nayeli led the way along narrow paths carved by time and wind. She moved sure-footed like she'd done this all her life. Eli followed, careful not to dislodge any rocks. As they climbed higher, the view widened. The desert stretched out below, endless, golden, silent. Eli paused, catching his breath. "You ever get tired of this?" he asked quietly. Nayeli looked out over the canyon. "Tired?" she said softly. "No, the desert is like a person. If you listen long enough, you begin to understand its heart." Eli smiled faintly. "Guess I've spent too much time talking to horses to hear anything else." She glanced at him with a small spark of humor. "Then maybe that is why the desert sent you to me, to learn how to listen." When they reached the top, the wind grew stronger, carrying the smell of water and wild sage. Between the rocks, a small spring bubbled from the earth, clear and cold. The sound of it was like music after silence. Nayeli knelt beside it and whispered a few words in her language. Then she began to fill the clay jugs carefully. Eli crouched beside her, dipping his hand into the water. It was icy, but it made him feel alive all the way to his bones. "You come up here often?" he asked. "Every season," she replied. "This spring never runs dry, even in the worst droughts. My people believe it carries the memory of the rain." He thought about that, the memory of the rain. It sounded like something worth believing in. They filled, both jugs, and rested for a while under a large rock ledge. The wind cooled their faces, and for a long moment they didn't speak. Eli watched the sunlight dance across the cliffs and felt a strange peace he hadn't known in years. But peace in the Wild West never lasted long. As they began their descent, Nayeli suddenly raised her hand, signaling him to stop. Her eyes narrowed as she looked toward a thin trail of smoke rising from the lower canyon. Eli followed her gaze, his gut tightening. "That's not from our fire," he said quietly. "No," she whispered. "Others are here." They moved down carefully, staying behind rocks. From a ridge, Eli spotted 2 men below, riders leading 3 horses. Their clothes were dusty, their faces half hidden by hats. One of them carried a rifle on his shoulder. They were poking around the canyon, following tracks. Eli's jaw tightened. He knew the type. Outlaws or drifters looking for trouble. Maybe the same thieves who had ambushed him before. "Do they know you're here?" he asked. Nayeli shook her head. "No one comes this far unless they want to hide. These men bring danger." Eli looked down at his sidearm. A revolver she had cleaned for him days ago. He still had 5 bullets. "Then we stay quiet," he said. "Let them pass," but the men didn't pass. They started walking toward the shelter. One of them laughed, his voice echoing off the rocks. "Smoke up there. Someone's camping." Eli felt his pulse quicken. He turned to Nayeli. "We need to move now," she shook her head. "They will follow the tracks. If we run, they'll find us. We must hide our trail instead." With calm precision, she led him through a narrow split between rocks and down a hidden path that curved behind the shelter. They crouched low among the bushes, watching as the 2 men arrived at the small camp. "Looks like someone's been staying here," one of them said. "Apache, maybe." The other kicked at the fire pit. "Or that cowboy we lost near the river." Eli felt a chill. He recognized that voice. It was one of the men who had ambushed him, the one he hadn't been able to hit before. "They're looking for you," Nayeli whispered. Eli nodded slowly. "And if they find you, they won't let you walk away either." The men began searching through the camp, turning over jars and blankets. One of them spotted the clay bowls and laughed. "Must be a healer's place. Let's see what kind of medicine she keeps." Something inside Eli burned at that. He wanted to stand up to fight, but Nayeli's hand gripped his arm firmly. Her eyes were calm but sharp. "Not now," she whispered. "We wait. The desert will help us." Minutes passed like hours. Then a sudden gust of wind swept through the canyon, carrying dust and loose branches. The 2 men cursed and pulled scarves over their faces. The wind grew stronger, pushing sand into their eyes. Nayeli moved quietly, her lips moving in what sounded like a prayer. Eli could hardly see through the swirling dust, but he felt something, like the storm itself was answering her. When the dust settled, the men were gone, their tracks fading into the sand. Eli exhaled slowly. "You knew that wind was coming?" She looked at him, eyes calm. "The desert listens when you respect it." He shook his head in quiet wonder. "You just saved us again," she smiled faintly. "Now we must rebuild the shelter." The storm took part of the roof. Eli laughed softly, still amazed by her calmness. "You're something else, Nayeli. I've met preachers, soldiers, and ranchers, but none could handle a storm like you." Her smile deepened just a little. "I am only what this land made me," she said. They spent the rest of the day repairing the shelter. Eli gathered wood and branches while Nayeli tied them with strips of hide. The sun set red and gold across the cliffs, casting long shadows over the canyon floor. When they were finished, they sat by the fire, tired but safe. Eli looked into the flames. "Those men won't stop looking," he said quietly. "They think I saw something I wasn't supposed to." Nayeli glanced at him. "Then maybe the desert will test you again. But this time, you are not alone." Her words filled him with a strength he hadn't felt since before the ambush. He looked at her, and in that moment he knew something had changed. The woman who had found him dying in the sand was no longer just his healer. She had become his guide, his teacher, and maybe something even deeper that he didn't yet understand. The night grew colder. Above them, the stars spread across the sky like 1,000 campfires of heaven. Eli lay awake long after Nayeli slept, listening to the wind move through the canyon. He thought of the spring, the storm, and the way she had whispered to the desert like it was alive. He had never believed in spirits or signs before, but now he wondered. Maybe the desert had not meant to kill him at all. Maybe it had meant for him to find her. And as the fire burned low, Eli Tanner, the cowboy who once rode alone, realized that some rescues were not just about saving a life. Some were about giving it a new reason to keep going. The night wind howled through the canyon, carrying the sound of rustling leaves and distant thunder. Eli Tanner sat by the fire, staring into the flames while his mind raced. Though the warmth touched his hands, a cold unease settled in his chest. The faces of those two outlaws haunted him, the same men who had left him to die in the desert. He knew they would return. Men like that didn't forgive or forget. Nayeli sat nearby, threading small bones and beads together into a charm. Her calm presence steadied him. The firelight flickered across her face, softening her sharp features. Eli admired how she could stay so peaceful even when danger lurked beyond the shadows. "You're quiet," she said without looking up. He nodded slowly. "Those men, they'll come back. They were hunting me then, and now they know someone's helping me. They'll want to finish what they started." She tied the last knot in her charm and looked at him. "Then we prepare," she said simply. Eli frowned. "Prepare how? You don't even have a gun." She smiled faintly. "The desert gives me everything I need." Before he could ask what she meant, she stood and walked into the darkness. He followed, curious. The moonlight bathed the canyon in silver. She knelt near a cluster of rocks, lifted a flat stone, and revealed a hollow filled with strange items: painted sticks, a bow, a few arrows tipped with sharpened obsidian, and a small pouch of powder that shimmered faintly under the moon. She took them out carefully, as if handling something sacred. "These belong to my father," she said softly. He believed that the land itself fights beside those who protect it. Eli crouched next to her. "You think the desert will help us fight?" She met his gaze calmly. "It already has once," he couldn't argue with that. The storm she had called upon had saved their lives. Maybe she was right. Maybe there was more to this land than he'd ever understood. The next day they worked from dawn till dusk. Eli strengthened the shelter, stacking stones to build a barrier in front of the entrance. Nayeli gathered herbs and rubbed them on the arrowheads. When Eli asked what they were for, she said, "To make the men's eyes burn if the wind carries it." Eli found his revolver and cleaned it again. 5 bullets, that was all he had left. He checked each one carefully. "I'll make them count," he muttered. By late afternoon, they were ready as they could be. Nayeli led him up to a high ridge overlooking the canyon. From there, they could see far across the desert plains. Dust clouds swirled faintly in the distance, riders approaching. "They're coming," Eli said grimly. Nayeli nodded. "Then we hold the canyon." Eli's hand brushed the revolver at his side. "If they get too close, we'll need to scare them off before they reach the camp." She handed him one of her arrows and pointed toward the ridges. "When I give the signal, shoot near that rock. The sound will echo through the canyon. It will make them think there are more men here." He looked at her, impressed. "You've done this before." Her lips curved slightly. "My people have defended this canyon for generations. We learn from the land." As the sun dipped low, the riders drew nearer. There were 3 now, the 2 Eli had seen before and another man with a red scarf around his neck. They dismounted near the dry riverbed, their voices carrying faintly through the wind. Eli and Nayeli crouched low behind the ridge. He could hear the men laughing below. "Look at this," one said. "Old Apache medicine camp. Probably got herbs, water, maybe gold if we're lucky." Another voice, rough and angry, spat, "Forget the herbs. That cowboy's here somewhere. I want his head." Eli's jaw tightened. Nayeli touched his arm lightly. "Not yet," she whispered. "Wait." The men started moving toward the canyon mouth. One led his horse up the path that curved toward their shelter. Nayeli nodded. "Now!" Eli raised his gun, aimed at the rock she had pointed out earlier, and fired. The sound exploded through the canyon, bouncing between the cliffs like thunder. The horses reared and snorted. One of the men shouted, "They've got more than one up there." Before the echo faded, Nayeli threw a small pouch into the fire pit below. It burst in a puff of smoke that carried on the wind, thick and gray. The outlaws coughed, cursing loudly. "Smoke bomb," one shouted. "Spread out." Eli fired another shot, hitting a rock near their feet. The echo made it sound like shots were coming from both sides of the canyon. The men ducked behind boulders, confused, but one of them, the man in the red scarf, was sharper than the rest. He looked up, squinting through the smoke, and spotted movement on the ridge. "There," he yelled. "On the ledge!" A bullet whizzed past Eli's shoulder, striking the stone beside him. He ducked low. "They found us!" Nayeli grabbed his arm. "Come! There is another path." They ran along a narrow trail that twisted behind the rocks. More gunfire echoed through the canyon. A bullet struck close to Nayeli's foot, sending dust into the air. Eli turned and fired once, grazing the shoulder of the man climbing after them. The outlaw fell back with a shout. They reached a narrow gap between two cliffs that opened to a small cave. Inside it was cool and dark. The smell of damp earth filled the air. Nayeli leaned against the wall, catching her breath. "They will search everywhere," she said. Eli nodded, reloading his revolver. "Then we use the canyon's tricks. You know these paths better than they do." A faint smile touched her lips. "Yes, and the canyon remembers who belongs here." Outside, the men were shouting, spreading out to search. The sound of footsteps echoed above. Nayeli whispered something under her breath and picked up a handful of sand. She blew it gently toward the cave's entrance. The dust swirled, then vanished into the air. Eli frowned. "What did you do?" "Confuse their eyes," she murmured. "They will not see what is right before them." Minutes later, one of the outlaws walked straight past the cave without glancing inside. Eli stared in disbelief. "Remind me never to argue with you," he said softly. When the footsteps faded, Nayeli motioned for him to follow. They slipped out the other side of the cave through a hidden passage that opened onto a high ridge. From there they could see the men below, still searching aimlessly. Eli lifted his gun again, ready to fire. But Nayeli stopped him. "No," she said. "The desert will chase them." The wind began to rise again, slow at first, then faster. It howled through the canyons, stirring dust and sand until the air turned brown. The men below cursed and scrambled for cover. Horses panicked, breaking free and running into the distance. The storm swallowed the canyon in a cloud of grit and sound. Through the chaos, Eli and Nayeli stayed close together, shielding their faces. When the wind finally eased, the outlaws were gone, driven off by the desert itself. Eli looked at her, amazement and respect in his eyes. "You said the land remembers who belongs here," he said. "I guess it decided we do." She smiled faintly. For now, they walked back toward the camp slowly, their steps light but weary. The storm had scattered half their supplies and the shelter roof was gone again. Still, they were alive. As they rebuilt the fire, Eli spoke quietly. "You could have run away from all this long ago, found another place to live. Why stay here?" Nayeli fed twigs into the flames, watching the sparks rise. "Because this is my home," she said. "My father is buried here. The spring keeps his spirit close. If I leave, his voice will fade." Eli nodded slowly. "And what about when others come again? You can't fight everyone." She looked at him, her gaze steady. "Then maybe I will not have to fight alone." Something unspoken passed between them. The fire crackled softly. The canyon, calm now after the storm, seemed to hold its breath. Eli reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver badge. Tarnished, worn. "Before I was a cowboy," he said, "I wore this. Deputy in Wichita County. I lost my way after my family died, but maybe I can find it again here with you." Nayeli's eyes softened. "Then you will stay?" He nodded. "If you'll have me." The firelight glowed on their faces as the night deepened. Outside, the wind had quieted, leaving only the steady whisper of the desert. In the distance, lightning flickered along the horizon, but it was gentle this time, a silent promise of rain. Eli Tanner looked across the canyon, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. He had been left to die under this same sky, and yet now he was alive, because of a woman who spoke to the earth like it was her friend. And as the first soft drops of rain began to fall, he realized that the desert hadn't just tested him, it had given him something he never expected to find again: hope, belonging, and a reason to live. The rain that night was gentle and soft, falling in slow drops that tapped on the stones and filled the canyon with the smell of life. Eli Tanner sat by the fire, watching the smoke rise in thin curls toward the roof. His clothes were damp, his body tired, but inside he felt a peace that had been missing for years. Nayeli sat near him, weaving a small mat from dried reeds. Her fingers moved gracefully, and the quiet rhythm of her work filled the silence between them. Outside, the desert glowed faintly under the moon, and the sound of the stream grew stronger with the rain. "You should rest," Nayeli said, glancing at him. He smiled faintly. "Can't sleep. The sound of rain, it's too peaceful. Feels strange after all the noise." She nodded slowly. Peace can be strange for men who have fought too long. Her words struck something deep inside him. He poked the fire absently with a stick, watching the sparks rise and fade. You're right, he said quietly. When you've lived your life expecting bullets, silence feels like it's hiding something. Nayeli didn't answer. She understood him without needing to speak. She reached for another reed and continued weaving. Her hand steady and sure. The firelight painted soft shadows across her face, and Eli found himself studying her again. The lines of strength in her hands, the calm in her eyes, the quiet power she carried without needing words. In the beginning, he had thought of her as only a healer, a stranger who'd saved him out of mercy. But now he knew better. She wasn't just part of the land, she was its spirit made flesh. He leaned back and listened to the rain for a while. You think they'll come back? He asked suddenly. She didn't look up. The men who hurt you? No, the storm frightened them. The desert marked them as unwelcome. They won't return soon. Eli nodded, though part of him still couldn't relax completely. Old habits died hard. You've got a way of saying things that makes me believe them, he said. She smiled softly. That is good. Belief is stronger than fear. The next morning the rain stopped. The world smelled fresh and new. Water filled the cracks in the stones, and the plants that had been brown and brittle the day before now glowed green in the sunlight. The stream that ran past the camp was wider, singing as it moved over the rocks. Eli helped Nayeli rebuild the roof that the storm had torn apart. He worked with quiet focus, cutting branches, tying them with strips of hide. She guided him patiently, and together they built something stronger than before. When they finished, they stood back and looked at it with a sense of shared pride. You build like a man who's done this before, Nayeli said. Eli chuckled. Maybe not with sticks and hides, but I've fixed enough barns in my life to know how to keep rain out. She smiled. Then we will not drown when the next storm comes. They spent the afternoon tending to the land around the camp. Nayeli showed him how to read the tracks in the sand. Coyote, rabbit, deer. She taught him which herbs healed wounds and which ones kept snakes away. He listened closely, memorizing everything. Each lesson felt like a piece of wisdom older than time itself. Later, as the sun sank low, they carried the clay jugs up to the spring again. The air was cool and filled with the sound of running water. Nayeli knelt beside the spring and whispered her father's prayer, thanking the earth for its gift. Eli knelt beside her, silent but respectful. When she finished, she handed him one of the jugs. You should say something too, she said gently. The water does not belong to one people only. Speak from your heart. Eli hesitated. I've never been much of a praying man. Then just speak the truth, she said. He looked at the spring for a long moment. The reflection of the sky rippled across its surface. Thank you, he said softly, for giving me another chance. Nayeli smiled, and together they filled the jugs before heading back down. That evening, as they cooked a small meal of roasted rabbit and roots, Eli noticed something different in the wind. It had turned cold again, sharper, carrying the scent of rain, but not the gentle kind. Nayeli noticed it too. She looked toward the horizon where dark clouds were gathering fast. Another storm, she murmured. A big one, Eli frowned. Worse than before? She nodded slowly. Yes, the river will rise. We must move to higher ground. They worked quickly, gathering what they could, food, medicine, blankets, and water. The sky darkened fast, and thunder rolled across the canyon like distant drums. The wind howled, bending the trees, and flashes of lightning split the horizon. By the time they reached the upper ridge, the storm had arrived. Rain poured down in sheets, cold and heavy. The dry canyon below began to fill with rushing water, turning into a wild river. They found shelter beneath an overhang of stone. The rain roared around them, and lightning lit the sky in fierce white bursts. Eli held the packs close to keep them dry while Nayeli knelt at the edge, watching the flood. The desert cleanses itself, she said over the thunder. It washes away all that does not belong. Eli looked at her, rain running down his face. Then maybe it's washing away the pain too. She turned toward him, her eyes glowing softly in the lightning's light. Maybe that is what it brought you here for, to let go. The storm raged on for hours. They stayed close together, waiting. When it finally passed, the air was cool and still. The moon broke through the clouds, shining on a canyon that had been transformed. The dry sand was gone, replaced by pools of silver water. The earth smelled alive again. They walked down carefully, their feet splashing through puddles. The fire pit had been washed away, but most of their things were safe. The shelter still stood strong, a sign that their hard work had paid off. Eli knelt by the stream and dipped his hands into the water. It was cold and clean. He splashed it on his face, laughing softly. "You were right," he said. "The desert does know how to take care of its own." Nayeli stood beside him, smiling. "And now it gives back what it took." He looked up at her, the moonlight reflecting in her eyes. "You saved me twice," he said quietly. "Maybe more than that. I don't even know how to thank you." She shook her head gently. "I did what was right. You owe me nothing." Eli smiled faintly. "Then let me stay. Not because I owe you, but because I want to." She was silent for a long moment. The sound of the stream filled the air between them. Then she nodded slowly. "If you stay, the desert will test you again. It always does." "I'll take my chances," he said with a grin. The days that followed were peaceful. The land around the canyon began to bloom with new life. Flowers sprouted among the rocks and birds returned to sing at dawn. Eli helped Nayeli tend to her herbs and build small water channels from the spring. Together they rebuilt the camp into something sturdier, something that felt like home. Each night they sat by the fire, sharing stories, her tales of the old Apache healers, his memories of life on the open trail. They laughed sometimes, fell silent other times, but always there was a quiet understanding between them. One evening, as the sun turned the canyon gold, Nayeli spoke softly. "When I found you, I thought the desert had sent me a burden, a man near death. But now I see it sent me a companion." Eli smiled. "And I thought I was finished with this world. Turns out I was just waiting to find a reason to stay in it." They looked out at the land spread before them, the river shining, the cliffs glowing in the fading light. It was wild, harsh, and beautiful. Eli reached for the small badge he carried in his pocket and tossed it into the stream. "That life's behind me now," he said. "From now on I work for this land, and for you." Nayeli nodded, her eyes glimmering in the sunset. "Then you will never be lost again." The wind stirred gently through the canyon, carrying the scent of water and wildflowers. The desert, once cruel and empty, now felt alive, full of promise. As night fell, they sat by the fire, the stars reflecting in the pools around them. The world was quiet but not empty. It was the quiet of peace, of a man and a woman who had found each other in the heart of nowhere. Eli Tanner looked at Nayeli, the healer who had pulled him back from death, and said softly, "You told me once if I wanted more water. I should close my eyes, I did. And when I opened them, I found you." Nayeli smiled, the firelight dancing in her eyes. Then the desert kept its promise. And in that silent, star-filled night, with the water still running through the canyon and the wind whispering through the sage, the wounded cowboy and the Apache healer found what both had been missing all along, a place where pain ended and life began again.